Patrick, before we get into the sticky notes, I gotta know, the Liberal government has announced what you think is a good idea, and I just can't wait. I gotta dig into it because I'm just shocked that you said good idea and Liberal government in the same sentence. So please tell us more.
Well, listen, at a high level, I think it's a good idea. Now, as much as I have my political views, I try and remain quite agnostic.
Oh, really?
It's just hard to be agnostic when you got a federal government like we do that screws up as much as they do, and a leader that does what Trudeau does. So, having said all of that, they did make an interesting move, which is around housing and developing housing, and to actually create a kind of what they, I think, referred to as wartime housing idea, where they're going to take basically pre-designed homes and put them up. And the reason I like the idea is, JG, it was just a little while ago I shared that same concept with you, is why don't they just go to basic fundamental homes, make them nice, make them current, make them efficient, hit all your ESG targets and do all of the things. The qualifier I had is do them in a factory setting, so that really all you're doing is setting them up on site. You're assembling on site. Then you don't need a bunch of tradespeople, which are hard to get a hold of. You can have controlled conditions. Anyways, having said all of that, I'm cautionary with what they're doing, because it is government after all, and really they can screw anything up. But this is, to me, a no-brainer in terms of solving a lot of the housing problem that we have. Go back to that wartime housing thought process. Basic homes, maybe 1,000 square feet, 1,100 square feet they could be, but all up to date, all cool. And then pick and choose the neighborhoods based on what the municipalities need. But I think it's doable if they can pull it off. Again, I'm a little bit worried about the bureaucracy.
The bureaucracies, you mean? Yeah, I understand, Patrick. But let's fetch this idea a little forward here, which is, so how does this get executed? Do you see? So is it local contractors that are building this? Is the government offering investors, or are you talking about the government financing and funding housing the same way they do in Singapore? By the way, there's a ton of that goes on in other countries. How do you see this rolling out, Patrick? I'm curious.
Well, they don't get into details yet. So that's why I'm saying it's cautious optimism, because the idea and the concept, I think, is really sound. I could be a little bit cynical with the government as opposed to skeptical, but I'm cynical because their track record is they won't pull it off, and it'll cost 3 times what it should cost.
Well, that's
And
for sure.
that's
Listen,
the issue.
you can always count on them screwing it up, Patrick. But that's not my question. I understand they don't know how to do it. If they knew how, they would have done it. Maybe, maybe not. Anyways, point is this: is I want to mastermind with you right here, live on the air. How should they do it in order to pull this off? That's my question. How would you do it if you were the fearless leader of this country, and it was, Mr. Patrick Francie up there that was, our fearless leader? How would you pull off this kind of program in order for it to actually be executed and actually be successful? Because at the end of the day, this ain't worth the paper it's printed on unless it's properly executed and makes a fundamental difference. And I'm curious to see, and I love the idea. The question is, how can we make it, so that it's executable and a really good idea? What are your thoughts? I have some thoughts, so I want to know your thoughts.
Well, as I've said before, at high level, based on what I think we could in fact pull off, is that we would do them in a factory setting. So in other words, we have the space, we create the space, and that could be empty warehouses. I don't care what it is, but convert space into a, kind of like the manufactured home concept, or even actually you could probably use a manufactured home supplier today and kind of help them reconfigure or whatever that looks like. But the point is, bring it into a factory setting, which is totally doable. It is being done. It has been done, where you don't need the level of trades on site to do some of the things that need to be done, because you can actually do it under controlled conditions in the factory, where you have trades guy directing and setting it up, so that in fact it's just a labor force that is actually hammering, doing what they need to do, but it doesn't require a whole bunch of trades guy on site. So that's the first part of it. Secondly is that it is flatbed and then assembled on site. Once you have the location, you're going to go out and have a whole different team getting locations set up, whatever those locations, whether they're going to be basements or no basements, whatever that might be. But ultimately, that's how I would do it. Factory setting, you don't need as much skilled labor to do it, and controlled conditions and controlled costs. I think at a high level, that's the direction I would go.
I like what you're saying, Patrick, and I want to go just a couple steps deeper into this, which is, first and foremost, I think where the government needs to do here is, number one, I think this could be a great source of jobs across the country. I mean, these are manufacturing jobs at the end of the day. That's what construction is. Construction is manufacturing jobs. You're just building homes. You're manufacturing homes. That's what this could be for this country. And I think those are higher paying jobs. These are high paying jobs. I think it's fantastic. And that's definitely something that could go forward. Where I think the government needs to do where they can play a really key role is two things. Number one is to set the proper narrative, Patrick. So far, what the government's been doing in terms of narrative is setting the wrong narrative. They've been vilifying investors like you, like me, like this community. They've been vilifying them. They've been doing everything they can to discourage investors from investing in real estate.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
That's what's been happening. I think that's got to be corrected, and the narrative has to be aligned to help us solve this housing crisis. Because if you unleash the right narrative and get us all us investors going in the same path, that's where you're going to solve this problem, I think. So I think the narrative is really important, and I think the incentives are really, really important. And right now, both are against us as investors, and we want nothing to do with it. But if you can fix the narrative and get the incentives right, which means low cost borrowing alternatives, which right now is impossible to get low cost alternative. It's a great time to be introducing those kinds of incentive to get everybody aligned and rowing in the right direction. And then I think you will build and organize this kind of program. And I'll give you another good example on incentives. It's like grants. If you had the right grants for investors to build a manufacturing facility in order to manufacture these things, that's what's going to work. The government should not be building homes. I want to be very clear. If that's their plan, they're going to fail. Governments can't build homes.
100%.
So
I think there's a couple things, it doesn't even have to be a grant. It could be a tax incentive. It could be all sorts of different ways of structuring it. But I want to say something around the narrative. First and foremost, the narrative that is happening is around investors is unbelievable. And, a lot of that is in fact driven by government, different MPs, because they're not going to take responsibility for the mess they've created. The problem with our housing in terms of an overarching picture is that it's very nuanced. There's a lot of different issues that are causing the housing challenges, from early interest rate, low interest rates, to now out of control immigration, or I want to say it's out of control because it's not being managed well. So we know we need immigration, but how they're bringing people in, the filter process, if you will, or the application process, are they being strategic? No. So we've got immigration, we've got low supply, we've got high demand, we've got interest rates that were historically low. Now we've got high debt, high interest rates. Listen, there's so many things that are impacting real estate. When we look at the cause of the challenges we face, investors are so far down the list, they don't even rank. So that's my view of it.
But it's funny, and we've proven this stat many, many times, Patrick, that the Canadian regular investor, like you, like me, like everybody who owns a couple rental properties, we make up the majority of the rental pool here in Canada. We are the ones that's going to solve this problem. They as in the government, we have to all get on the same page, on the same wavelength, in order to solve this together. And I think the right incentives will go a really, really long way. I like your idea of tax incentives are great. Grants are phenomenal. Borrowing options are phenomenal as well. The government can and should facilitate borrowing options for us to be able to build this stuff. Patrick, how many investors could you name right now off the top of your head that would love to build an extra 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 rental units if it was facilitated, and if it was easier to do so, they all would do it?
100%. And this goes back to what I've said many times, and I know you're the same way, is we don't mind paying taxes. It's what our government's doing with our tax money that's driving me crazy. When we look at the list of priorities that this country has in terms of housing alone, let alone infrastructure and healthcare and the rest of it, the way we're spending hundreds of millions or sending hundreds of millions outside the country, or even billions, is just, I'm left, I don't know, incredulous, if that's the right word, that how the hell do you justify and how do you prioritize when that money flowing out of country not as an investment, not even as a loan, and as gifts. And it just drives me crazy. And then, of course, how much money and energy we're putting into climate action, which, again, I don't have to debate climate action. I think it's important. But when I look at the list of priorities, really, look at what Canadians are doing right now, JG. They're having to prioritize where they spend money. And many homes are literally having to do that because of how challenging it is to make those high interest payments. Our government, on the other side, on the other hand, is like, there is no budget. Whatever budget they wrote, it's like, throw that away. We'll pay attention to it later. Anyways, I rant, I go off. Back to housing. I think the idea is good, whether they can pull it off or not. If it's the government that's going to take it all on, 100% it's set up to fail. But I think the idea is great.
Absolutely.
If you like what you learned here, go to the description below and subscribe for our free Insiders newsletter, where you can also stay up to date for our upcoming events and our courses.
If you want to see more stuff like this, click here. If you want to see the entire show, click there.